Hey everybody, how's it going? Dan Shinder here on Drum Talk TV, coming to you from Globe, Arizona. Where the hell is that? I live here and I don't even know. Actually, we're 100 miles east of Phoenix, and my guest today, our friend Joe Franco, is coming to us from Pelham, north of the Bronx, kind of near my wife Angie's old neighborhood. Joe, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Dan?
Good. Thanks for taking time on a Saturday to talk drumming and music and your career and your post production studio and all that. It'll be fun. And folks, I have the monitor up over here so I can see your comments and maybe a lot of questions for Joe. And first, let us know where you're watching from. So, Joe, I got to start with this. You've played over the years, you've played with so many amazing musicians, from the late, great, legendary, one of the most influential blues players and bass players, Jack Bruce, Steve Walsh of Kansas, Magellan, of course, Dee Snider, Eddie Ojeda from Twisted Sister, and of course, playing with Twisted Sister, and just so many others. My first question is, when are you going to stop fraternizing with all these hacks and get with some real artists? No, but seriously, my question is, because for those of you who don't know, Joe doesn't really drum actively as much professionally. He has a post production house called Beatstreet NYC. What made that flip flop? Why the change? With such a great career and you're such a good drummer. We'll show some clips in a moment. Author of Double Bass Drumming.
Well, everything's an evolution, right? Um, the way my career evolved was I'm really lucky, very fortunate, because you know what happened in the early '90s. I'm out on the road and playing with Dee Snider and Widowmaker, Al Pitrelli, Mark Russell. Probably the favorite band I ever had. I mean, that was like just a killer band, but it was like time for Nirvana, and I love Nirvana, and I love Pearl Jam, and I love the whole grunge thing, but it wasn't who we were.
Right.
And just about that same time, I was living in Manhattan. I had a drum studio with Jonathan Mover. The two of us had a place together,
Right.
right down the block from where I live, and met my wife and got married, and all of a sudden we're expecting.
Uh-oh.
Okay. And metal is tanking, and I need my home studio to be turned into a baby's room. So, I live on 22nd and 3rd. I walked down the Broadway, looked at some spaces. I said, there. I parked my recording gear. I closed up the drum studio. Jonathan and I, we mutually agreed we had enough of that, and I just married my drums to my gear, and I set up shop, and I'm very lucky that a couple of years later, maybe a year later, I was approached by some people from Sesame Street that I've done a lot of work for.
Wait a minute. So, wait. What I'm picturing is there's a knock at your door, you open it, and there's Big Bird, the Cookie Monster, and Grover at your porch, basically.
Well, they don't come in costume, but they're all there. But they're all my best friends. The puppeteers are the greatest.
Yeah.
They're the greatest. Big Bird just passed away, and he was Big Bird since 1969.
Yeah.
And what a beautiful man.
I grew up on all that.
But anyway, so what happened is hey, we're doing this new show. It's going to be called Between the Lions, and we'd like you to play drums on this show. And I said, oh, that's kind of cool. I think I had a little bit of touring left. And I said, this could work really well because I'm kind of winding down, because, nobody really wants to hear 80s metal in the 90s.
Right.
And
you went from metals to Muppets.
Yeah, metal for Muppets, exactly. That's perfect. But so that's what happened. And I said, if you want me to play drums on this show, you might want to come and check out this space I just put together. The drums are always mic'd. I'm ready to rock. They came, they looked at the space, and they said we could do the whole show here.
Wow.
And I was like, that was 95. And 25 years later, I'm still doing that.
This is so cool. I want the viewers to really, open your minds and really understand the lessons in that, because what that story is all about, it's funny, I have a parallel story I'll tell you real briefly, but that story is all about being adaptable and flexible. You know, metal, as you say, was kind of taking a dive, going in the tank during that time period in the 90s. Grunge was coming out. And it doesn't mean your career is over. It just means you got to do something different. The weird parallel I went through happened 10 years earlier. I was in a progressive rock band called Opus One. We played all over LA, Hollywood, up and down the Sunset Strip. And our music was a cross between Gentle Giant, Frank Zappa, and Kansas.
Love
And
it.
in the beginning of the 80s, what was happening? Well, that's when hair metal was being born with hairspray and spandex right next to real short, spiky haircuts and skinny ties, the new wave movement. And in America, Prague was totally taking a dive, and we were just too snobby at the time to make that sort of adaptation. And we powered through. We were still chasing that record deal, and no one wanted to talk to us. And so I went, and then we were expecting our first, and I went to grooming younger artists that had more of the music style to fit. So I started producing, I started writing music and voice casting for radio commercials, doing music for independent films, and just totally switched gears and stayed in the music business, but just not doing what I wanted to do. I wasn't touring anymore, doing any of that, and loved it. I really loved it. So there's a great lesson in your story there that I just really
There's something
appreciate.
about walking into a studio every day and there's microphones and you're producing sound and you know you're not on stage playing drums, but it doesn't it's not that different.
Yeah.
You're still
If
in it.
anything, it's more of a petri dish for creativity. You go on the road and you're kind of following a script every night on tour, whereas a setup like yours, you walk in and make anything happen.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was I was fortunate it just worked out. The timing was perfect. And here I am, and then we had a second child, and I have two young ones, and I'm taking them to the Sesame Street set, like it was great because I'm growing up, I'm growing them up, and I'm doing children's television. We're watching cartoons together, and anyway, after a while, it became Dad. I can't believe you're watching that. It's like
That's cool. I
it's like
want
I
to play
still
a
watch
clip.
cartoons.
Oh, that's great. I want to play a clip for everybody, and this is Joe way back before most of you were born. In fact, so long ago that it was recorded on a medium that pretty much no longer exists called VHS tape. And this is 1990 at Zildjian Days event, a really cool drum solo. And then we'll give some shout outs and take some questions and talk about influences and things like that. So here we go. Check out Joe, double bass. Groovin'. I want to skip to this one part over here. There's a little taste, folks, of a little bit earlier days of Joe Franco. So you wrote double bass drumming, and how would you, for someone who just landed on Mars, or for folks too young to have been around when it came out and all that, how would you describe it, and what's the biggest takeaway now that there's 10,000 books on everything out there?
Well, at that time there wasn't.
Right.
There were a few double bass books. Now Louis had one. My good buddy Carmine had one.
Yeah.
But there was not, in my opinion, um, something that I thought was contemporary that I felt could really make double bass musical. Okay. And it was basically at the time, I was playing really fast double bass, but I wasn't doing anything, in my opinion, that was super musical. I was playing really fast shuffles and really fast 16th or 30-second notes. But there wasn't much else going on. So I kind of started a system of playing where I had a downbeat and an upbeat. And I played things like, and it's very musical.
Yeah.
And I felt like, okay, I'm going to play downbeats here, I'm going to play upbeats here, and it's going to have a really musical sound. And if I get into this method of playing, I'm going to be able to play riffs, and I won't have to think. You know how like you have something in your brain and it has to come out through your hands and feet? Well, I'm going to have a system of doing that. I won't have to make that step of how am I going to play this?
Yeah.
So if I hear a riff and I hear I can go,
Yeah.
and it sounds musical. It's kind of like strumming a guitar. It's like a down up thing, and then you what I'm saying? It's kind of like, and so I went with that, and it carried in the triplets. Wrote out grooves and wrote out fills, linear fills, just different combinations of hands and feet. And that's kind of what people want to do on double bass, I mean, how many times have you heard quads? But that's kind of limited. Let's do all kinds of variations of hands, feet. And so anyway, it evolved. And I spent the year from 82 to 83, I spent the whole year putting this together. I started doing a little teaching. At the time, I had a house out in Huntington, Long Island. So I 2 days a week, I go to the Long Island Drum Center with all of my, scribbled notes of my book. And I try them out on these kids, 15-year-old kids who are now killer drummers. And it was a great experience. It's probably my best achievement of my career.
Oh, wow.
My
That's really neat. Very fulfilling.
Well, I mean, because it's not like, okay, I hate to say lucky because I'm lucky and fortunate and talented, but luck is has a little bit to do with it. I got to play in a big famous band, and now I'm you. But like writing a book, I thought was something that I didn't have a famous band. I didn't really have a famous band back then. I played in a local band called Good Rats,
right,
in the Northeast, but no one knew who the Good Rats were anywhere else.
Yeah.
We had a cult.
Yeah, and there's some of those people actually chiming in, Joe, that say they love Good Rats, and some people saying they got your book, and in fact, so Carmen Puglisi Jr. says Good Rats live at last, love the Rats. Glenn Savio Pinto says, I have your double bass book, Joe. My students also use it. Incredible. That's a huge compliment when someone else is using your material to teach their students. That's awesome. John Kinsting, Joking Drums, is on board. Lori Shue, part of Drum Talk TV. She's in St. Pete, Florida. Who was your first or biggest, or tell us both if it's two different people, double bass drum player? What influenced you to play double bass drum?
Ginger Baker.
Ginger, yeah.
When I heard Toad off Fresh Cream, I'm like, whoa. This is really cool.
Very musical.
And I tried to, oh my God. And I tried to simulate what he was doing. I didn't know we had two bass drums.
Right.
I was playing a roll between my floor tom and my right foot, and I had it down pretty good. And I was able to do the other stuff, And then I saw a picture. I said, oh, okay. and yeah, so he was my first double bass hero.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And then but he was not approachable. He was a Brit, and you got to see him once a year when Cream came around. But a very big influence on me was when I went to a drum clinic. First time I went to a drum clinic, and this was probably really early 70s, 72 maybe. Um, and it was Carmine Appice. And it turns out, we're good buddies now. It turns out this was his very first drum clinic. And it was in Hempstead, Long Island. Sam Ash Music Stores threw it in the basement of a church. So I went down there and you know, Carmine, I mean, you know, I saw the fudge on Ed Sullivan. I mean, that was like, it was like Ringo, then Dino, and then Carmine. You know, it was just like it just got cooler and cooler. And Carmine was like Dino on steroids, you know? And so to see him up close and a drum clinic situation really, really had a big influence on me. And then to boot, and this ties in nicely with the book and the educational thing, I just approached him and said, you know, hey man, do you give lessons? You know, and you know, back then Carmine's 5 years older than me, but back then 5 years was like 20 years. You know, this guy has.
So you're like, wait a minute. So you're 75? No, I'm kidding.
Oh,
I'm kidding.
Oh, he is.
Yeah.
So anyway, so he gives me his number, and I started taking lessons with him.
That is so cool.
To his house. And guess what he was doing? He had a bunch of scribbled out notes. He was writing realistic rock.
Yeah.
And so I was taking lessons from him while he was writing his first drum book. And that was a big inspiration to me to, as soon as I had a gap in my playing schedule, I had left the band and went to another tour, and I came back, and all of a sudden in '83, I didn't have a gig. And I was like, this is the time to write the drum book. Now, you know, before you get crazy again or whatever happens. And that's what I did. I just, for a year, it never left the kitchen table, you know.
That's awesome.
Carmine was a big influence for double bass, you know, when Baker and Carmine. But it went to other levels, you know. I remember in late 70s, over the course of 1 week, I saw Terry Bozzio record Heavy Metal Bebop at my father's place, a little club in Long Island. And the same week, I saw Simon Phillips play with the Jack Bruce Band. And he had like a big Ludwig Octoplus with a 57 in every tom. And he was just like, oh my, I saw those two guys a week apart. And it was like, oh my God.
Wow.
You know,
almost too much influence to fill your head with.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on in the 70s. You know, I was into all of the, you know, Cobham and of course Narada and Alphonse Mouzon. They were my heroes. I loved all those guys.
Are there contemporaries, and when I say contemporaries, let's take like, given the context of your influences, anybody in the last like 20 years playing double bass that you admire? And with that, and you could answer these two separately, of course, but with that, I'd like you to also consider, explain to the audience your perspective on the difference between double bass drum playing and double pedal playing. But first, well, who might be some contemporaries that you admire, and do they play double bass or double pedal?
Well, the guys I like play double bass. I like the young guy. I say young guys, but you know, my buddy Brian Tishy, or how about Glenn Sobel? Jason Bittner. These guys are monsters. Those three guys, I love them. I love them all. But those three guys come to mind. You know, I think of those as a younger generation. And double pedal. I mean, hey, to each his own. You know, I just like the sound of two different drums. I just, to me, that's double bass. You know,
playing wise, would you say there's much of a difference between playing double pedal, where the beaters are hitting one drum, where maybe the head doesn't respond the same way to that second beater, the way an individual drum would respond to its own single beater on a double setup?
Totally. It's totally different sonics. Totally different sonics, you know? And if you're standing in front of somebody playing two bass, it's such a cool vibe, you know? I love that.
That's
cool. I have nothing against playing double pedal. It's it's a really cool thing. It's a great invention, you know? I just never did. Actually, I tried to do it once. I was playing, I had to play a real proggy record, and it was a lot of double bass. And I remember going to Premiere. At the time I was playing Premiere drums. And I remember going to them for a new kit. They were putting out a new line. And I had just like, 124. and I played the double pedal, and I started working on the record at my studio so I could do it at my own pace, which was kind of cool. It was Magellan, a band called Magellan.
Yeah.
Okay. And I can't think of the name of the album. It was a very long story about losing a brother in the Vietnam War. But I just can't.
Yeah, I don't remember the name either, but
working with Trent and his brother.
Yeah.
R.I.P. I couldn't play. It was weird. I just didn't feel it. I was hell bent on, like, I'm going into this double pedal thing. Double bass is old school. I just couldn't feel it.
That's funny.
I know. It's supposed to be easier, right?
Because and it shows that there is a difference. There really is.
There really is. I felt so much more fluid on two bass drums, And I know there'll be so many people who say the total opposite,
Yeah. Plus, and when you have two bass drums like Ginger and like Kofi Baker, they don't have to be the same size. They can be tuned differently. Why not? There's so many things you can do with them. Since we just spoke so much about double bass, I want to show a video of you not playing double bass. And we're coming up on next Friday is September 25th, the anniversary of John Bonham's death. 40 years. I can't believe that. 40 years? Yeah, 40 years.
80.
Yeah, 40 years. So here's Joe back with Brian Tichy on guitar and friends at the Bonzo's birthday bash, the very first one. Here's Joe playing Heartbreaker with one bass drum pedal, Jason Bonham. One Jason. Check it out. There's a little prelude to the celebration that I'm going to do on Dan's Almost Daily Vlog at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern U.S. times on the 25th to celebrate John Bonham's music and his great backup band, Led Zeppelin. And it's probably going to be an hour long, which means it'll end up being 2 hours long. But we'll get back to John in a moment. I have some really neat comments and questions for you, Joe. One of them I know the answer to, but I'm going to let you answer it just for fun. And it is Giampiero Franco is saying, do you have any relation to Italy?
Not, yeah.
Or was your name changed from Frank Ozinski?
Frankenstein.
Frankenberg.
That's my Rosh Hashanah name. No, my. Not only am I 100% Italian, my parents were both born in Italy. I'm the first generation here.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
I'm
great.
100% from Calabria. Calabria.
Oh. Hey. And here's, hey David and AZ, how are you? Rick Fernandez asks, did you teach at Long Island Drum Center with Guy Gelso of Zebra?
Yeah, well, I didn't teach with him, but we both. I
teaching at the same time?
Out there. Yeah, I taught like early 80s out there.
Okay, so yeah.
82 to 85, that time period.
Yeah, I think Zebra earned more longevity than they got. Does that make sense? I think they blasted out with a killer debut album. They were around for a bit and kind of went away, and they were great.
They still are.
Yeah.
They still play, and they're still great, and it's, of course, the same trio. And I love those guys. We met in their hometown Let me tell you a funny zebra story.
Sure.
We met in New Orleans in '76. The Good Rats had a hit single down there, and so they came to one of our shows and they said, "Gee, we hear this big scene going up there in Long Island, New Jersey, the tri-state area. Like there's a big club scene up there. We're thinking of coming up." And I hooked them up with all of our agents and all the whole thing. And next thing I know, zebras all over the place. And
Wow.
back in that day was Good Rats and Zebra, Twisted Sister.
Yeah.
We were three of the bigger bands, and we'd be
Yeah.
playing to thousands of people a night.
I'm
Great scene.
embarrassed to say that I honestly didn't know that Zebra was still active. I love that. I'll have to look them up.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
They sound great. If you can YouTube them and all,
Yeah. I'd love to have Guy on. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you can find them on Facebook.
Okay,
Look 'em up.
cool. I'll look him up. Thanks. And here's a question from John Kinsting, who does little mini series with us on Drum Talk TV. His question is, any advice for someone who is eager to write their first book? That's a great question for someone like you.
Yeah, I think a lot of things have been said about drumming and drummers, and find your voice. Find something that you really feel that you can speak with authority on, and keep your concept really tight and focused. I think there's always room for new ideas, of course.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thanks. The more you can show how you differentiate from everything else out there, the more likely.
Yeah, if it's all over the place, it's a little tougher. But if you find a niche, for me it was easy because there wasn't hardly anything out there on double bass.
Yeah. So, was it printed on papyrus back then?
Yeah.
And let's see. So John Kinsting also has a question, something we slightly touched on, but maybe you can give a little bit more articulation of this. He says, any thoughts on Ed Shaughnessy's approach to using different size bass drums, which I mentioned Kofi does, Ginger had.
Yeah. Well, there's different reasons of doing that. Ginger did it because he liked to have his toms a little lower.
Right.
So on his main bass drum, it would be like a 22 or maybe even a 20, I forgot if he's 22 or 24. But whatever the case, he was able to get his toms lower. And on his left bass drum, he didn't have any toms there, so it could be a little bigger, That's one reason. I personally, I like to have my two bass drums sound the same, because no matter how much you think they sound the same, they never sound the same.
Right, that's true. Even if they're tuned the same, you never hit them exactly the same.
Yeah, the closest I've ever got is my current kit.
Right there.
My DW kit, and I'm not, hyping because, it's my company.
That's okay, you can.
But it really is the first time I had a drum set where every drum sounds like it came from the same tree. It's just incredible.
Yeah, well, that's John Good, the wood whisperer. So there you go. Yeah, that is really cool. I just saw... tell us about this. Chris Chanel says, hey, what's up, Joe? I saw you last night on the Steve Show and Tell.
Yes.
What is that?
Oh, dear. That was a lot of fun last night. Steve Longo, now he was in a local bar band at the same era we're talking about with Zebra and Twisted and Good Rats. He was in the band called Rat Race Choir. And they did, oh my God, they did Jeff Voltol, note for note.
Oh, wow.
That was, that's what I never saw them. I saw them 2 or 3 times only because we were always gigging, But they were amazing. And now Steve, and Steve's a very accomplished drummer. He played with John Entwistle. He played with a lot of, really cool people. He decided to have, just kind of a talk show, cool. Why not?
Yeah.
And last night, my bass player from the Good Rats, who's a lifelong friend, Lenny Kutke, was on the show, and he said, Joe, I'm giving you a link. You got to come on. And we went on, and we just,
that's great. It's great.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, because this is always fun. I love talking about drumming, the gear, influences, our individual journeys. There's always something to learn, and that's really where the concept of Drum Talk TV came from, as I said in the very beginning, that the reason I started doing interviews, and before I officially started Drum Talk TV, I had an online lessons thing, and I started interviewing other educators. And some people said, "You're crazy. Why would you interview your competitors?" And like, it never occurred to me that they're competitors. And I said, I think we can all learn a lot, not just from sitting at a practice pad or a drum set, but learn from each other's perspectives based on our unique experiences. And thanks to my wife, that turned into Drum Talk TV. That's what it's all about. So it's fun to talk about all that stuff. That's good. I'll have to check out his show. Okay, so David Dickerson says, I'm a righty recovering from a right ankle surgery. Oh, he was on our show yesterday with Dr. Nadia Azar, who's a kinesiologist I do a show with once a month to talk about repetitive motion injuries related to drumming. And so David has recently had an ankle fusion surgery. I'm basically relearning everything left-handed to compensate from lack of mobility. Any advice for keeping on beat with everything that feels backwards, other than practicing in front of a mirror?
No, I mean, you know, I don't do it often, but I mean, if I ever just practice with my left hand leading, you know, with my left hand ride, it makes all the rolls that you start with the right hand more even. I mean, there's so much to be said about that. You know, you're really as good as your weakest link, you know?
Yeah.
And certainly for a righty drummer, it's your left hand, you know? And just, it's amazing how if you just played left hand ride for 10 minutes, and then you just went back and played your regular style of playing, you go around the drums and it just feels better.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said. I mean, it requires, I guess, a lot of discipline to go behind the drums every day and, okay, let me just work on my left hand. I kind of like to go behind the drums and have fun, you know?
Yeah.
But it is a great thing if you can discipline yourself to work on your weak hand as much as you can.
Yeah,
you know? Again, rudiments do that. I mean, paradiddles and, you know,
right.
But even more so when you're doing it physically, you know, putting your left hand in a different place where it's not being, you know?
Yeah, ambidexterity is the key. And you mentioned some of these drummers earlier, Billy Cobham, Simon Phillips, and we add Lenny White, Don Famularo, that are open-handed players. What I've learned about myself, I've always been very ambidextrous, but in the last, I'd say 3 years, I don't play open-handed per se, but I can completely switch in the middle of a fill or a beat where I'm doing riding with my left hand on a splash and hitting the snare with my right, and then switch back to the bell on the right. And it just makes it so much easier. So I think really the more we become, and really I think ambidexterity is, drumming is the most ambidextrous instrument out there. You know, like I don't know how many clarinet or sax players could switch hands. Right?
Yeah.
And even the way the instrument's built, how many guitar players can just flip it over and restring, okay, yo, play. You know, but drumming, it's almost a requirement that you need, you know, to be ambidextrous. So that's going to help as well. Yeah, cool. Let's see if there's other questions. If not, I've got a lot. Don't worry. Thanks, everybody, for... Hey, Ingo Marte is watching it. Ingo, how's it going, brother? Cool. So, tell us more about, in your career, all the people that you've played with. I think most people know you that know about your drumming career, about playing on the big stage, rocking out with a rock band. But you've also done a lot of behind-the-scenes programming and things like that. Talk about that, and also maybe open people's minds to that, to add to their toolbox for a career path, and how does one go about finding them in the spot to be able to get that kind of work?
Yeah, well, for me, it was mid-'80s, and Lindrum came out.
Oh, wow, remember Lindrum?
I had no interest in Lindrum. Every Lindrum sounded the same. It was just, no way. Give me my sticks. So Simmons came out at the same time. At least Simmons, I can play the drums, you know.
I still have a 1982 set of Simmons SDX.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah. I have a 5-brain. I have a 5-brain, actually, here. And I don't know what I'm doing with it. It's just collecting dust. I don't even know if it works, but I got the 7. The reason I bought the 7, that was the one after the 5, is because you can actually sample a drum, put it on an EEPROM, and play that drum. That's when I felt that it had more personality, or it had your personality, because you can play a sound that you created. So, cut to the chase, a couple of things happened at once. I did Fiona's second album with a producer named Bo Hill, who you've heard of. Bo Hill, we did Rat and Winger and Warrant and all those bands.
A whole era of music, really.
Well, after doing 6 of the, or maybe 7 of the 10 songs, he goes, okay, we're going to bring in a programmer for the other 3. And I said, huh? I'm the drummer in the band. And that was kind of like the final straw, because up to then it was like, oh no, we're going to program that. Okay, whatever, But that was really attached to that band. I toured with them, and we were doing our second record, getting ready to go out again. And I wasn't intimidated by computers, I have a BS in computer science. That's actually what I went to college for, only because it was easy. It was easy for me to write programs. It's just like the way you're wired. For me, programming is, not a big deal. And I actually enjoyed it. And after Lindrum, there was a drum that Emu made, called a drum machine called the SP12.
Yes.
Now, you were able to put a whole kit in here. I mean, but talk about humble, you can only fit 5 seconds. This is like 85, okay? And you had to have a floppy disk drive, a real floppy disk drive when they were floppy,
Yeah.
And you had like a Commodore 64. You remember those?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It was pre-internet, folks.
That was the beginning of this is cool. And what I would do, I got so into it because I could collect all these snare sounds, and I would do things with my hi-hats where, oh my God, I would take like 30 samples and crossfade them into each other, and I'd map them all out on a drum cat so I could play a hi-hat track and make it feel like a hi-hat, with the different crossfades, open and close things, slightly sloshy. This cuts off this. Anyway, I had a thing about it. I got into it. To me, I love the challenge, and the gear kept getting better and better. And the Linux High drum machine came out, the MPC 60. And then the coolest thing is I got into sequencers where you can play almost in real time. You had 480 places you could put a quarter note. 480 places to put a quarter note within a beat.
Yeah.
It pretty much covers it. You can pretty much play a buzz roll,
Yeah.
So I got really excited about that. Put a pad kit together, and I would record into a computer, And anyway, so how did I get into this? That it evolved. How did I get on all these big records? This is actually a very funny story.
And talk about some of those records too.
Oh, I'll talk about them. But I have to tell you this story first.
Yes, please.
One day I'm coming out of the Long Island Drum Center, and there's a recording studio across the street. And I see my friends in Twisted Sister, And I walked across and, okay, what are you guys doing? I heard AJ left the band. What's going on? And they said, yeah, you should probably come in, talk to Dee and see what's, Anyway, long story short, I go in there, and they're doing demos with this engineer programming the drum machine. And the sounds were not rock, and it was kind of lame. And I know these guys, right? So I said, guys, I mean, this is like really wimpy. You want to do some program demos? Let me help you out, So we got this engineer fired from the project. They came to my home studio, and we banged out all the demos.
Nice.
That engineer happened to be Rick Wake.
Oh,
now,
wow.
Rick Wake. That's how I met Rick Wake. But then we brought my demos back, the twisted demos, to finish the vocals and everything after I laid down the drum tracks, and he really loved what I did. So I earned his respect, even though I got him fired. 2 years later, he has this big hit with Taylor Dayne, And for Tell It to My Heart, and he programmed the drums. It's very roboto. And he wanted to do a new record with her with like ballads and things that needed more of a drummer touch, And that's how I got into making all these big records because, like a lot of drummers, you have a producer, a hit producer that likes what you do and hires you for all of his records.
Yeah.
So because of that connection, I did Taylor Dayne, Mariah Carey, Celine Dion, Natalie Cole, Diana Ross. I mean, I hate to, yell out names.
No,
but I mean,
it's
It
great.
was a great time,
Yeah,
But it was
again
really
great
because
example.
I met this guy that I got fired. You got him fired, and and then the story behind that, and this is interesting to people. When you make a record, you're not in charge. The producer's in charge. Well, I met my nemesis again 2 years later, Bo Hill, when we were doing that Twisted record. The guy that inspired me to get into programming, I meet him 2 years later. We're doing a record, and he goes, "Joe, we're trying to get this record out in September. These demos sound great. Is it okay if I use the program drums?" And I'm like, "No."
Oh.
That's how that record had program drums,
Wow.
I know, and it was such a bummer, because I wanted to go out and rock,
Yeah.
But it was a very fine line between drums and programming in the late '80s. The early '80s dance records came in, and the drums were humongous, on these dance records, right?
Yeah.
So the rock drummers would go in and say, "I want my drums to sound big like that. I want my drums to be really important."
Yeah.
Well, you got to play really simple, and you got to play to a click, and you got
leave space.
And so then you play the drums, and they replaced the sounds with bombastic samples, which I used to do that stuff as well. And you're playing with a click, and you're replacing your drum sounds with samples, and there's a fine line between that and just programming the thing. You know what I'm saying? Like each hit doesn't have a personality to it, and so I understand why that came about. And Bo Hill, he did an Alice Cooper record at the same time, programming. Everything became, that's what you did. Some producers, they didn't want to hear about live drums,
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the long story. Made a long story longer of how I got into the whole drum machine thing and programming.
It's good,
you know
though.
what? I liked it. I really enjoyed it for what it was because I was creating samples and creating these hi-hat things. Then it evolved and everyone came out with sample libraries. And nowadays you have these, plugins for Pro Tools where you can just, instant drummer,
Yeah.
So a little bit of the challenge is out of it. And once I opened Beatstreet in '95, and I had my drums there, it's like, forget about the drum machine, get me some mic.
It turnkey.
Yeah, I don't even own a drum machine now. But back in the day, late '80s, it was big stuff.
Yeah, and again, it's just another example of being flexible and adaptable. And who better to program drum parts than a drummer? I mean, duh.
No doubt. And I programmed like a drummer. I mean, the biggest compliments I used to get were like Diane Warren when I did 2 songs off Taylor Dayne's second album. She couldn't believe it wasn't a drummer, know, and that was a great compliment. But then again, a true programmer, you get someone like you get a Jimmy Braylauer. He's going to program what's best for the song. He's going to. I don't care if the hi-hat's still going while the fill happens. I couldn't do that. I couldn't. I was like, oh no, you can't do that. That's impossible. So I was that kind of programmer. I wasn't like, I didn't just think like a composer or producer.
Right.
I programmed like a drummer.
Yeah, I love that. A quick, before we go to the next topic, a quick Simmons note here. So as I mentioned, I got mine back in '82. And then shortly after that, Rush came out with, there was Grace Under Pressure, there was Hold Your Fire, and in there somewhere there was also Power Windows, and Neil was using a lot of Simmons. So I'm trying to match some of these Simmons sounds, and I couldn't dial it in just right. And so I kind of rationalized in my own mind, oh, okay, they must have just made it sound that way in a mix. Years and years later, I saw a video or read Neil saying that you mentioned the sample capability, and he used to literally take a mic and go, and then he would slow it down and do stuff and load those sounds. And then I'm like, no wonder I couldn't get those sounds back then. You know, it's like, duh.
That's what happened when they went to the Simmons 7. You know, you were able to burn into the EEPROM. It seems so archaic now. You know, they were actually these little, looked like caterpillars, you know, and you put them in the circuit boards, you know. Oh, wait till you hear this sound.
You had to crank it up on the side. That's funny. So going back to your musical journey with all these, again, these great bands you've played with, and, you know, let's separate the bands you played with and then some of these other great artists that you did programming with when working with a producer, and you could even include producers in this question. Can you please give 2 or 3 people that you really learned a huge takeaway from, whether it was to apply to your playing or the business side of music or being in a band, or what are some huge takeaways you learned and from whom, and what was the epiphany that you had?
I learn from everybody. I can't really signal out 1 or 2 people. It's like it's a constant evolution. It really is, you know.
Yeah.
I will say that, like, you know, when I did start programming, you know, when you're playing the drums, you're on that side of the glass.
Right.
And if you're programming, you're in the control room.
Yeah.
And that enabled me what does that do? And what does that do? That got me into audio. That got me into, like, you know, so when it came time to put a studio together, from the programming end, I learned about gear.
Yeah.
You know, so that's an interesting evolution, you know, because the drummers, the guy on the other side of the glass finishes a take, turn around, no one's saying anything. Oh shit, they hated it. You know, you know that feeling when you're
you don't know what's going on in there. The talkback mic's not on.
Right, you know, and then you know so that was something that really taught me just the process of playing from the control room. In terms of, like, producers, oh my God, I had, like, just jingle producers would say things to me like, you know, if you open the hi-hat a little more there, this will sound, and this will make this sound cooler, and you know, like little things like that. And it could just be one session, and I can't really signal out 1 or 2, like, oh my God, that moment really inspired the rest of my career. It's just constant evolution.
Yeah.
Learn from everyone and every day and every session.
That's great. That's great. Let's see if there's any more questions. Oh, here's one. Here's a real important question from Rich Frisco. He says, does Dan talk the whole interview? Not all of it. Only about 7/10. Thanks for following what we do, Rich. John Kinsting has another question. He says, any thoughts on Narada, Michael Walden, where you have great drummer plus a great producer?
I do a bunch of miles on a stationary bike in the morning before I get on double bass. And this morning, let me show you what I listened to. Because it's not up anymore. That's right. I downloaded something else. His new record is killer.
Really?
Killer. I mean, it's like listening to that guy on Wired again.
Oh wow.
You know? It's like no one combines chops and groove like him. And his fills, oh my God, the fills, go get this record.
I will.
I mean, hold on, I'll tell you the name of it.
Okay.
Because you have to get it, like, immediately.
Go write it down.
Okay, Michael Narada. Okay, Narada Michael Walden. It's called Immortality.
Okay.
Immortality, and the track Immortality, and you'll think of what I'm telling you here. When you listen to it, you're going to just laugh your ass off. The fills in that track. Talk about, like, you know, like my favorite drummer of all time is Tony Williams, and, like, he does a fill, and it's just like, oh my God, you're at the edge of your seat. What's going to happen next? You know? That's the way Narada is on this record. He plays these fills, and you feel like he doesn't even know how they're going to end. You know, how exciting it is.
That's awesome.
Again, I'm so excited because I just heard it today. So whoever asked Lenara the question, he's like up there.
That's really cool. I'm gonna get that.
Yeah,
Lindsay, I want to answer Lindsay McDonald's question. Joe, can you talk a little about the double bass drum book? Lindsay, you might have joined us after Joe actually told the whole story about that, so be sure to rewind. David Dickerson asked a really neat question. What's your favorite double bass song to play, and what challenges the most to keep? What challenges you the most to keep improving your craft?
Oh, my favorite double bass song to play. Well, the one that you posted on your site today is one of my favorite.
Yeah.
It's called "Am I Evil?" It's the first song, first side on the first Widowmaker record.
Yeah.
We did two of them. I love that record, that track. We played that track because whenever I play it like I recorded it. And what I remember about when I recorded it, forget about no click. We didn't even use headphones. No click, no headphone, nothing. We just went in and rocked.
I look like in a garage.
Oh, and that's why it feels that way.
Yeah.
It just feels like it's
organic.
So exciting. Yeah. So that might be my fave.
That's cool. One more question from the viewers, then I've got a question. And folks, if you're watching this on the archive, go ahead and throw some more questions in. Joe, maybe in a couple days or something, I'll send you the link. You can kind of cruise through and see what else people are asking. Mike Skinner in Wales says, has Joe Franco used 2-box modules before? I'm not familiar with what those are either.
Sorry, I don't know what they are.
Okay, yeah, Mike Skinner, maybe you could drop in a link. That would be cool. I mentioned we'd circle back and talk about John Bonham. You played at a few Bonzo bashes. Where does Bonzo fit in to your scale of influences, and what are some of your favorite examples of his work?
Well, first off, okay, I saw Bonzo's first show in New York. They played the Fillmore East, and they opened up for Iron Butterfly.
Oh, wow.
And at the time, my favorite band was Jeff Beck Group with Jeff Beck and Rod Stewart. I love the way the Brits, they took American blues and they made it cooler, and their arrangements were so cool, and it was just they electrified that genre.
Yeah.
I love that. Then Zeppelin came out. They came on that day, and I went to see Zeppelin. I mean, Iron Butterfly. I mean, I liked them when they first came out, but this was Jimmy Page's new band, and Jimmy Page were from the Yardbirds, and the Yardbirds were like, that was where they all came from, right?
Yeah.
And so I went to see Jimmy Page new band, and before I went to see the band, I remember specifically listening to WNEW. That was the big New York station. Your wife will know it. And hearing Good Times, Bad Times. Now, remember I just told you the story about how when I heard Ginger Baker play Toad, I thought he had one bass drum, and I tried to play it between the bass drum and the floor drum. Well, when I heard John Bonham on Good Times, Bad Times, I was expecting 2 bass drums.
Right. That's awesome.
So I went to see him play, and he's like this single kit. And, they're doing this blues stuff, I Can't Quit You, and he's doing those bass drum triplets. And it blew me away.
Yeah.
Blew me away. I guess Good Times, Bad Times. I think that's the one that caught everyone's ear. It was that was amazing. The Sonics. I'm a Sonics guy. I like the sound of Bonham's drum.
Yeah. I mean, you feel like you're in the room with him.
Yeah. And when you combine amazing feel and chops and those Sonics,
Can't beat it. They were my first concert, actually. I was 14, and it was June 25th, 1977. My dad took me, and it was beyond mind-blowing. I had posters of them all over my walls. I learned all the songs, and to see them, that was the first time the lights went on, and it was like, oh my God, that's them. It's funny, I'm 57, and I still see bands and go, oh my God, that's them. That's such a kid about these things. But yeah, that ruined everything for me as far as becoming an oceanographer. I wanted to now be the next big drummer, or at least have fun making a living playing drums. So, Joe, I have two last questions. The first one is: do you remember the first time you sat at a drum kit and actually formed a beat, something that made sense? Do you remember that, and how that felt?
Yeah.
How old
Yeah.
were you, and what did you think when you saw and felt your limbs doing something that sounded like music to you?
Well, okay. So I guess when I was, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, I lived in the same house as my uncle. My uncle had a club date band, had a Red Sparkle WFL kit, um, 22 by 12 bass drum, 9 by 13, no floor.
Wow.
The drum tool was the trap case. The trap case looked like this,
Oh, wow.
and he got married, and the drum set just sat down in the basement, did nothing. It was just collecting dust, right? And then I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and I went down to Uncle Tony's drums, and I started playing around. And he taught me two beats. He said, "You only need two beats: the twist beat and the jazz beat." The twist beat was like, and the jazz beat was ding 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 ding, right? So it was like, yeah, I could play the Beatles with these two beats.
And then Good Times, Bad Times came around.
Oh no, that's many moons later. That was like, I'm talking like 64,
I
60.
know.
That was like 5 years, 6 years later. But like, yeah, those were the first two beats I played, and it was amazing. It was totally amazing. And then I wanted to play Wipeout, and I got a floor tom for Christmas, and
there you
it was
go.
from there.
Cool. My last question, and thanks everybody so much for joining us. Keep the questions coming. Thanks everybody. Joe, this is the Joe Franco fun fact question. When you're not doing anything that has anything to do with music, what do you like to do? Do you collect anything? Do you have hobbies? Do you like to read? What do you like to do when you're totally detached from music and
Golf.
working? Nothing.
Golf.
Oh, golf! I thought you said nothing. Oh, so you're a golf player. Okay, me too. The castle and the watermill are my favorite holes.
Well, yeah, look, I'll try to make this quick. We're running out of time. Oh yeah, we ran out of time.
Yeah, we got a
My
couple
wife
minutes.
got me into it 10 years ago. I got into it later in life, and it's a real Zen thing to do. I thought it was the most idiotic thing in the world, but once you get smitten,
Yeah.
I mean, you get totally addicted. And
Are
I
you
love
good?
hanging out in the front. No,
No.
I'm not good at all.
I play like in the high 60s.
You shoot the high 60s?
Yeah, if it gets warmer than that, I'm not going out there.
Hey Dan, before I leave, I'd like to plug something really quick.
Please, yes, anything you want.
Okay, well,
it's a family show, so as long as
Yeah, it's very family.
Okay.
About 3 or 4 weeks ago, the new the new publisher of Modern Drummer magazine, David Frangione, called me up and asked if I would give them permission to do something new with my book. And we're going to do a new version of double bass drumming, and Modern Drummer is going to publish it.
Oh, that's great. Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. The book is since '83. I mean, the book is like almost 40 years old.
Yeah.
And we're going to see if we can pump a little new life into it.
That's awesome. Send me the info when you have that all together. That's great.
You will. You'll get it.
That's really cool. Joe, hang on the line for a minute after we say goodbye to the audience. Audience, thank you again so much for joining Joe Franco and myself, Dan Shinder, here on Drum Talk TV. And thank you so much for following what we do. We've still got the last quarter and 2 weeks of the year left, and we've got some fun things happening. Gavin Harrison joins me next week on Wednesday. Scott Kentner on Tuesday, and I'm doing the John Bonham tribute on Friday. And we'll see you all soon. Thanks, everyone.